Hi everyone, Professor King here. In this video, I'm going to be discussing Tim Wu and Robert Putnam. Wu's reading is the introduction to the book that we've already read a selection from. The introduction is subtitled Here's the Deal. And then Robert Putnam's chapter thinking about social change in America from the book Bowling Alone that we've also read a chapter from already. You can find both of these readings on our class Canvas page. And nothing new here. And because there's really kind of nothing new, I'm just going to make this a shorter video and help you to contextualize this within the context of the course, and also to help you kind of think about how this might help in terms of your approach to essay 4, the final research essay. So I will, in just a moment, I'm going to take it to a share screen. As always, I like to remind you that if you have questions, comments, concerns, you can get a hold of me in a variety of ways: Canvas, Pronto, my professor email, Instagram, whatever works best, or my office hours. So whatever works best for you. All right, so let's just dive right in. Again, we have read Tim Wu already. We read The Fourth Screen in the Mirror of Narcissus from the book The Attention Merchants, which both of these chapters come from. And we've also read Robert Putnam, the selection Reciprocity, Honesty, and Trust from Bowling Alone. So because we've already read these writers, we kind of have an idea of how they write, what their style is, what their tone is, what their topic is. But we're going into more depth. And really, the reason why I situated these readings when and where I did is because if you notice the trajectory of this course, we kind of go from thinking about rhetoric historically and on the individual scale. Then we go into the present day and we look at how, one, we are still actively participating and living in rhetorical history. Sorry, I got a fly buzzing around me. And also, we're starting to think about not just how rhetoric affects the individual, but how it plays a role in interpersonal relationships, the relationships we have with our peers, with our family, with our friends, with our schools. And then ultimately, what we're looking at is rhetoric in the large scale, right? Rhetoric within a culture, rhetoric about, in terms of cultural issues, large scale issues, group issues, institutional issues. So I don't know if the way that I set my course up makes that clear. But if you think back, like essay 1 was about one rhetor, right? So we started with the individual, and then we started talking about interpersonal relationships, right? We had things like Solnitzman Explain Things to Me, where she talks about these interpersonal interactions. Gia Tolentino, the same thing online. Baldwin, when Baldwin discusses interactions he has perhaps with his father or with people in the various places he's lived. And now we're kind of looking again at how all of society deals with these things, how all of society has elements of rhetoric and persuasion running through it and the issues that it discusses, but still how we as individuals within that society are interacting with it. So if that wasn't totally obvious, I don't know, I'm eliminating the fourth wall or whatever you want to call it. So let's bring it back now to Putnam and Wu. This time we're talking about Putnam's chapter, thinking about social change in America, right? One of those kind of large scale issues that I just mentioned. And Wu's introduction, Here's the Deal. So for both of these, we get to these conclusions, which I'll just say collectivism now, because one, I don't want to give too much away. And two, they come to these conclusions in very different ways, clearly, because they're different people talking about different things in different contexts. But there is this notion of like collectivism that we need to adhere to. That's going to somehow aid in some of these social ills or problems or issues we're having. Well, what are the problems in the present? Because again, that's where we are. And by present, I don't necessarily mean, this day in May 2021 or whenever you're watching this video in the future. But I mean this sort of, general present, the last 10 or 20 years, or maybe even more, depending on what we're talking about. So collectivism now, what are the problems in the present? According to Wu, the problem lies in the sort of commandeering of the public's attention at the hands of these attention merchants. And you have to, think about arguments of definition. What is an attention merchant according to Wu, from what we've read, from these two different pieces we've read? Who are attention merchants? What do attention merchants do? What is presumably positive and perhaps inherently negative about attention merchants or attention merchandising, if you will? Branding, social media, internet consciousness, distraction, fragmentation, particularly as that pertains to our consciousness, our perception, how we take in the world, that fragmentation, and how that might be a problem. And what we've sacrificed for convenience. What have we sacrificed for convenience? And how does Wu feel about that? Then once you have that answer, how do you feel about that? Again, try not to just say, I agree, because then we cease to engage in critical thought when we just agree. Think about how it applies. Think about where you disagree. Think about to what extent you agree. Again, have nuance, have complexity, because otherwise, like I said, we're not engaging in critical thought. And then we have Putnam. And for Putnam, the problem in the present deals more with the erosion of these social groups over the last 40 years. We could even say 50 or 60 at this point, because this book's not super old, but it's a couple of years old. There's less civic and social involvement. And again, we have fragmentation, even suspicion, but it's a different kind, because Putnam is talking about something different. So what might be helpful, because I love me a Venn diagram, and I always bring up these dang Venn diagrams, is to think about the similarities and differences you see in Putnam and Wu. If we're starting to see similarities in terms of like them saying there's a problem, them saying we need to do something to fix it, them saying that these are certain aspects of the problem that are similar, that's great. But how are they doing it differently? What are they saying that's different? How are they going about it differently? And one of the ways we see this is in the historical examples they utilize. They're focusing on different points in history. Figure out when those are and why that's important to their specific discussion. Because if you remember for essay 3, I have you do some historical research on your own topics. And so the reason why we do that is, again, to have this kind of Janus-faced approach, Janus faced, right? We're sort of looking at the past, seeing how it's brought us to the present, and then thinking about, given all of this information that we have, where do we go from here? Because if we just start here, we're ignorant of all this huge gap of knowledge over the past several thousand years that has been developing. And then we may come to the wrong conclusions for the future, right? So that's why we look to the past. That's why we do historical research. That's why we have a Janus-faced approach, so that we can see the patterns of human social evolution, of, again, what worked and what didn't. Have we tried these things before, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I digress. Ultimately, think about how each writer, and even Marable that we read recently, must acknowledge the problems that exist in the past think about how each writer must acknowledge the problems that exist in the present as well as in the past in order to anticipate solutions for the future. Well, why am I having you do this? Why am I having you look at these examples and think about this? Because this is exactly what we're doing for SA4, right? We're thinking about an issue that exists today, perhaps how we got here, and then what we can do to change its course, essentially, for the future. So again, I don't just pull this stuff out of thin air willy-nilly. There's a method to my insanity. I'll take it off share screen now. I know it may not seem like it. You're just, you've been watching video after video of this middle-aged kooky broad talking about Tolentino and Putnam and Rousseau and Foucault and all these people, and you're like, what? She's just a weirdo. No, there's a plot right there. it's all being illuminated. So I hope you're starting to see that pattern. I hope you're starting to think about these things in terms of your own research that you're doing. And topically, your research may be different than Putnam. It may be different than Wu. It may be different than what Tolentino research is. That's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. But we do, if you notice, as writers, we do a lot of the same things. And there's a reason for that. It's because we're part of this centuries, millennia old rhetorical tradition. So we're part of this community now, whether you all like it or not. And so in being part of this rhetorical community, this academic, scholarly, rigorous community that we've all shown up to college and signed up to be like, hey, I'm here. How do we function? What are the things we want to talk about as part of this community? What do we want to contribute, not just to our classroom and to our campus, but to our world? So big, heavy things, right, to think about, but you don't have to solve all the problems. You just have to solve the ones that you care about and that you think you can do something about. And if we all do that, if we're all just the tiny little droplets in the ocean, we're still changing the direction of the waves. I know me and my metaphors, I just love to go full hilt on the metaphors, but a lot of times students feel overwhelmed by these sort of discussions of social issues because they're like, well, I'm just me. I'm just a nobody, or whatever you want to call yourself, which is really crummy to say about yourself, but that's a discussion for another day. But you're not a nobody, and you have agency. You have the ability to make change in the world. You have autonomy. You have the ability to make choices for yourself. And hopefully those are rooted in a love for the world around us and a love for yourself and a desire that, knowing that there is a better world possible and there's a better life for all of us possible, to think about how we can work individually and together to achieve that. And again, it doesn't have to be anything big. It can be something small. It can be creating a community garden. It can be, helping people with their mental health issues because you've been through that before. It can be, whatever you want. But now for SA3, SA4, you have the opportunity to think of what that is, right? And to keep developing that in the way that is, again, meaningful and authentic to you. So I hope all this helped. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and evening. Again, I am available in all of the ways I mentioned at the beginning of the video to contact me. So make sure you do that. Try not to leave comments on YouTube. That's the one way I would say not to contact me, because there's so many like weird porno websites that I don't really know how to get rid of. And there's like, sometimes someone will leave a snarky message, but that's subsided. So I try, what I'm saying is I don't really look at my comments on YouTube because I don't want to see like, hey, I tried this weight loss drug, come to my link and see how it works. I hate that stuff. So try to hit me up another way other than YouTube. And you're my student, so you have ways of getting a hold of me. All right. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day and whatever evening. Time doesn't exist anymore. So bye. Bye.